So professional.
Oh, it has worked, just as you said, so professional. That is literally the opening of it. I said this pre-recording, no one's ever accused this of being a professional production, so let's not start that now. I'll get as much mileage out of that joke as possible. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second live recording of the SEO Huddle podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jerry, Garrett, Pedro, and Carolyn making their SEO Huddle debuts, and hopefully will not be scared off by this and will come back again in the future. Today, we were going to be discussing a few different topics, but Google has graciously dropped a core update about 15 minutes before we planned to record this. I did reach out to John Mueller, but if he wanted to come on and have a chat about it, but apparently he said he was busy. So you're going to have to make do with us. So kind of kicking things off and looking at the core update. Obviously, with 15 minutes into this, it's far too early to tell anything that had happened. So anything that's happened to your site in the last 15 minutes is, I'm probably going to go on a limb and say, is correlation, or you've just turned your server off. Does anyone have any strong feelings as to what we'd probably expect with this? Do we think it's going to be a reversal of any previous updates, or is it probably just going to be BAU moving forward and hammering affiliate niche even more?
We get updates all the time now, and to be honest with you, I think 2/3 of the updates have not really affected most of my clients massively at all. But then just occasionally something will kind of change everything. Like suddenly Reddit will be available for every single query, or, and they'll just hammer something like affiliates or somebody. Somebody will be complaining and somebody will be happy. But, I don't think trying to work out every update is always as beneficial as it should be. It's just trying to understand where Google's going and the direction it's going in. And, at the moment, it seems like Google is changing its direction perpetually. So, yeah, I think Pedro's probably got a stronger opinion on this than anyone.
Well, I stopped paying attention to these updates, to be honest. Like I don't, it's, for me, it's useful to know if something happened. Just for me to have to mark it on a timeline and then see if it correlates with something. But I don't go like poking it around and see what it might be different from anything else. But because as you said, in my case and the clients that I've worked with, and not much changes. And we all know that what Google aims for. They aim for like quality and fighting spam, and probably this AI tools that kind of produce content at scale have become like kind of a problem. So they're kind of probably going after that, but it's expected. So I wouldn't say that there's much here to that it would pique my interest in, to be honest.
Yeah, to jump on that, it's like, it is nice. It almost feels like a PR move in terms of the core update. Obviously, it's like different when it comes to a product reviews update, or when they did the helpful content update, like when they put a name to it. But like you look at like the Mozcast, the volatility is constant every day. We're getting more personalized anyway. So it's only when there's something obvious that comes out. But I feel like ever since the kind of when Danny had I hate to say, when Danny had all the niche bloggers to Google, I feel like the PRs have become, it's a little bit of a different strategy going forward. It's my take.
Don't you miss like the old days when you just have like a blog post like 5 days after, like how to get out of this update?
I usually don't pay attention to the updates much, like not glued to your computer, kind of paying attention to them, just unless something starts breaking really crazy and it's necessary. If every time there was an update rolling out, all you did was track everything, that's all you do, and you'd go crazy. So I think it's like Pedro says, you mark it on the calendar, you make a note of it, and then if anything does go a little sideways, you compare the dates, you look at the data, and you see if you can track it back to that, so that you've got a starting point or a frame of reference for what you need to fix. But yeah, you can't get obsessed with it.
I think as an industry, we're probably slightly pre-trained to chase it though, because like Pedro said, years ago, we'd get a nice blog post telling us roughly what changed or different things, or even just a little bit more meat on the bone, as opposed to now that literally they've reduced it to a row in a table as almost like a token gesture. But as an industry 10 years ago, we'd pick that up and we'd chase it and we'd do algorithmic recovery and things like that. And we'd find ways to commoditize it. And most of the industry still has that mindset. So I think that's why when we have these updates, there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of, I think it's more hype through uncertainty than anything. In that, if we make the most noise about it, we can seem like we know the most about it, as opposed to actually understanding what's changed.
Well, I will say that years ago, especially when I was in-house in big corporate environments, I had to know when it was happening and roughly what was happening, because invariably there's some executive who every morning gets up and does a vanity search. And if his vanity search shifted at all, he will be running to my office in the morning with his hair on fire, demanding to know what is happening. And if I didn't have an answer, even if that answer wasn't conclusive, it just needed to sound like I was paying attention. Oh yeah, we're on it, we're watching it. Then there were problems. So yeah, people were definitely trained to make sure they at least had a rudimentary awareness of what was going on. But I don't know. It seems it's more of a surface level at this point, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that's the key thing, is making sure that you are aware of what's happening in terms of the, what's happening in the market, where Google's kind of trying to go. So is basically when somebody turns around to you and says, why do I no longer rank for, as you say, that weird vanity term that, we kind of spammed into it almost, or did something weird to kind of get, what's happening is the key part of it for many in-house people. For agency people, we just need to be able to tell our clients, by the way, there was a Google update, don't worry about it, it's BAU, they make 12 of these a year and every day things change. So yeah, I think it's important just to kind of have that sense of, we know it's fine.
I think on that sense as well, like what Carolyn said, it's been knowing, understanding, and I think Garrett, you might have said as well, we make a log of it, and then it's a reference point to understand if other stakeholders down the line go, oh, why did this break 6 months ago? It's like, because you ignored what we'd been telling you for 12 months previous. Or if you're the case of an affiliate site about 12 months ago, it's just because your business model was no longer preferred or something like that. My curiosity with this update is going to be how many of the changes align with looking like they're piecemeal mitigating anything to do with what the DOJ is saying at the moment, like especially with things like preference to own services. Are we going to see a shifting that to potentially lessen some of the other elements as well?
I don't think that's going to happen yet. So the way these kinds of court cases work, just because the DOJ has said that that's what they want Google to do, and just for reference, they were initially talking about kind of breaking them up, old school AT&T style. They wanted them to sell off Chrome. They wanted them to break them up into just component pieces that couldn't talk to each other. The way the court cases work here with trademarks is not trademarks. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. I'm totally brain farting. What the monopoly cases, antitrust, that was the word I was searching for. Antitrust cases. Google can't file an objection until the government makes a statement about exactly what it is they want Google to do. So we're at the point now where the government has said, this is what we want you to do. And now Google can go back and file objections. So we're still really far away from anything actually happening. And I don't know, unless they're pretty positive that they're going to that the hammer is going to come down on them in a certain way, and they're trying to proactively start making preparations for that. I don't think any of this has anything to do with that, because we're just way too early in that conversation for them to be thinking about that. I also think that they're going to be making a case. They're going to be citing, look, everything that you've based this antitrust case on is already changed. You can't penalize us and say that we need to get rid of X, Y, or Z because the industry has already moved past that. Look, we're already losing market share. How can you say that we're a monopoly because we're losing market share and this is happening and that's happening? So there's a lot more arguing left to do. And I don't think we should be jumping any conclusions by trying to correlate anything that comes out of the DOJ right now, or with Google regarding that antitrust case, with things that are actively happening in the updates.
Are Google actually losing market share, or are we just kind of believing it?
It's very well. So the thing is, they have such a ginormous market share that they can lose, a sliver of a fingernail, and whoever picks up that sliver of a fingernail just like 4,000x their user base.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah, it's a big deal for everyone that's picking up the scraps. Realistically, probably not a big deal for Google. But the optic of it, they can clearly, they can turn around and say, look, so here's the way I would do it if I were their lawyer, which I'm not. I would, rather than saying what percentage of the market share I've lost, I would go with raw numbers, because the raw numbers are horrific. If you're just looking at the raw numbers, we lost 80 billion customers last month, and everyone goes, oh no. But then if you converted that to percentages, it says we 0.007% of our customers, then it's not such a big deal. So yeah, it's so technically, yes, they are, but it's not. I don't think anyone's going hungry at Google.
I was gonna say, I'm not scared to jump to conclusions. Nothing's happening. I will say, to your point, Carolyn, by the time anything does happen, it's too late. The technology just moves too fast and our government moves too slow. B, did I say one, then B? I hope I did. The next part is the fact that we're in a place of deregulation. Like our government, at least the US side, I don't know the impact that the EU might eventually have, if they would. There's nothing, I think, practically that'll happen to Google. If anything, it's things they can throw money at and get to disappear, or delay for years and years, to the extent of like, because our government doesn't understand how immersed the technology is, that how like difficult it would be to tear it all apart. And then going back to what Carolyn was saying about the antitrust, the whole case had nothing to do with Chrome or anything like that. It was just mostly around the fact that Google was the default search engine on Apple, Firefox, Samsung devices, and those monopolistic deals. So my personal opinion is the only thing I could see that actually would have a material impact that could happen would be them forcing them to shut those deals down, which I do think makes a difference, but they're already so ahead of the game in the data that they have.
Well, I think the reason Google won't want, there's a couple reasons why I think Google won't want to divest themselves of Chrome. Number one is they get so much data coming back. And that's what's giving them their competitive advantage with all of these developments and advancements they're making, is all the user behavioral data that they get back. And if they're separated from that, that really puts them more on a level playing field with everyone else. The other thing I kind of wonder about, there were rumblings that they were able to execute, they were processing JavaScript and things like that on the clients rather than sending it back up to the mothership and using their own power to do it there. And that's been debunked, and certain people have claimed that it's debunked. I'm not 100% sure that it's totally debunked. If assuming that were the case, there's a lot more that they can see that we don't realize they can see. If they were forced to start sharing that data to level the playing field, everyone would then know how much access they had. And that could be
right, but consumer protections are gone. Like we don't have, they're removing the Consumer Protection Agency right now. So while I agree with you, it is all problematic and they absolutely should. I think the reality of how it plays out is unlikely.
Yeah, and everything is moving too fast. Plus, this was all started during in a different time, during a different administration. Everything's different now. So, I mean, who knows?
I mean, touching on the point of it was around the dominant search engine part, that's been a thing I've been interested in. I've written about it as well recently, because there is precedent of that happening in another country historically. So I think it was around end of 2021, the Federal Anti-Monopolistic Service in Russia, through complaints made by other Russian companies to the Roskomnadzor, actually found in favor and forced Google to make a widget And I think at the time, Android had like an 85% penetration in that market at the time. And it was you have 60 days to build this widget, and you will give everybody a brain trainers derailed. You'll give everyone this widget of default search engines with approved text, and you will allow people to make that decision, and you will make it easy to switch back, and you will not try to influence it. And at the time, I think there was about a 10-15% switch from Google to Yandex. Other things have happened in the past 2-3 years to exacerbate that switch even more, but at the time, that switch, even on mobile, was quite considerable. So there is at least a legal precedent, and I know the European Union were using some of those precedents on Russia as well as part of some of the things they were doing against Google as well in the anti-monopoly. So that side, I could see being an outcome from it. But yeah, the divesting of Chrome is a bit Google, like as you said, Caroline, Google wants to hold on to that with literally the nth degree of their fingernails.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think divesting from Chrome is going to be Google always had, like, in a way or another, a way to tap into user behavior. Before Chrome, they had the PageRank toolbar. I think we are all old enough to remember that. And every time you installed it, you would have this disclaimer saying, yada yada, it goes data to Google. And so with Chrome, is like just like a PageRank toolbar on steroids that can send all kinds of data to Google. So I don't think that's. I would assume that how they can judge a lot of their qualitative aspects as well from search, on judging user behavior, on how users interact with search results, and etc. So I wouldn't see that happening on Android. I see that could possibly happen, and they've tried, like, since they made the move to become like Alphabet and kind of break everything around them, like, into smaller pieces. I think this is an attempt to mitigate this kind of governments kind of claiming that they have too much power. But as I said, I would be really, really surprised if they are forced to part ways with Chrome. But anyway,
I mean, the whole RFPJ has got a lot of bold statements in it, especially, but I think on page 1, make knowledge that Google It is part of the. I mean, obviously, it speaks just to the American people, but Google It is part of the American vernacular, the staple, and how they acknowledge Google has become extremely well known. But it's, I think the exact quote is something like, less understood, however, is how Google, through its unlawful and unchecked monopolistic conduct over the past decade, has secured the American people's reliance. And for me, being one more interesting part of that is they just reference the past decade, because unfortunately, I'm old enough, as I'm sure people have called out, to remember Jeeves and Lycos and everyone else, and how they woefully fell short of what Google was setting in the early and mid 2000s. So it kind of feels like this monopoly, if it is a monopoly, has been grown in the marketplace for years, and the challenges fell away very early on. And yeah, your DuckDuckGos and your Bings exist and whatnot, but I mean, Bing originally made them have an ad search engine, if I remember correctly, as well at one point.
I think it's less that they were doing such a good job in the beginning that they got this great head start. It's that once they got that head start and they were far enough ahead, then they started tearing up the highway behind them so that people couldn't catch up. And the whole premise of the antitrust suit is that they're leveraging their insurmountable already market share to just not even, I think the best way, the best analogy I can come up with is when you usurp a kingdom, you go and you kill all the people that might possibly challenge you in the future, even if they're in a cradle. Like you don't even let them get a start in life. So the whole premise of this is that they're leveraging the influence that they have now to just completely prevent anyone from challenging them at all at any point in the future. And the government claims that this ultimately is bad for capitalism, it's bad for prices, and it's bad for innovation. Google's argument then is, no, we're innovating just dandy, and as long as we're not, just completely raking people over the coal with prices, you should keep your mouth shut and stay out of our business. So that's really kind of what it's come down to. But the government feels like, or they see an opportunity to clear a little bit more room, so there's more innovation, more opportunity for additional companies to come into the marketplace and invent and innovate and grow the economy.
Just before we close off on the topic of the DOJ, does anyone have any other viewpoints they want to add, or anything else to that? Before we move on to an equally fun topic with Google.
Well, as a segue, I think one thing that is underscored here with the DOJ is this thought of Google potentially having its like Netflix blockbuster moment as it transitions to AI. And so in the back of their minds, I think that in theory, if DOJ wanted to make a difference, they would want to prevent Google having a monopoly on conversational search, generative AI going forward as part of this, argument of are they preventing, as Carolyn was saying, other companies from taking over this new market? Because a lot of the DOJ trial was talking about defining what is a search market, and can you even be a monopoly there? What is like the whole ads market is a whole other thing that we'll see, a few years down the line. So I think right now it's really interesting as we segue to the AI stuff and the impact of, is Google making the right moves as the default search AI going forward?
So I guess that does segue us quite nicely onto AI and looking at our innovation space, Ben. And I think it feels like it was in the past week, at some point in the recent past, Google has now launched for testing for AI mode. And I've played around with it a little bit. Garrett, I know you've played around with it a little bit. What's your initial impression of it compared to all of Google's other AI toys they seem to be throwing out the prom at the moment?
I don't think it's significantly different from the most recent models of Gemini. I mean, it is, the most recent model of Gemini Flash, like kind of integrated with search. I tested out a little bit with like local. It's still not 100% there yet. I still prefer like traditional local searches. I think generally speaking, you get what you would expect. We were joking a little bit before this in the green room, if you will, Dan, about, adding some nice design flares on there to make it look. But, if you notice, and I don't think this is as big a deal either, when on the Google app, there was a toggle to use Gemini briefly with traditional search. And this feels very similar. And I don't think it's as significant as say like AI overviews, because as we're going back to this conversation about like default search, AI overviews was in your face. There was no off button. You could not avoid it. And so the general public had to, kind of decide whether or not this was valuable or not. And Google, Sundar's been saying, oh, people love it. This is the best thing ever. Unless they actually replace AI mode as your default version of search with the traditional experience, like I think it's going to be like a segment of users might use it, but it's not going to have an impact on AI the way that AI overviews do. But I'd be curious to hear everyone else's take on that.
One of the things I try to do when anything new like this comes out is I try to leave the bubble, because my viewpoint is very similar. I was quite underwhelmed by it. It did feel like a CSS change and some nice graphics and an upgrade to the UX department. But like I went on to like Android Authority, Wired. I want to see what the other viewpoint is, and I was more surprised. A lot of their reactions and initial takes on it were more positive, in that it felt more immersive. It felt like there was a bit more it's the immersion side. There was more expansion to it. They felt it was easier to maintain that communications model, easier to have a follow-up, so it didn't feel as janky as some other models. And that if we look at kind of thought theories around stuff, there's a model out there on adaptations of technology, sort of adoptions of technology. I believe it was first done in 2015 by someone called Sundar, and it was a theory of interactive media effects at time. They then updated it in 2020 to be the high time model, and that is the movement of human computer interactions to human AI interactions, so HAII time, and that's the model. And it essentially is for this to take effect, there has to be the interactivity, the AI. There has to be an expectation of what that interactivity will bring. And reading through especially Android Authority and Wired's articles on this, it feels like that expectation has been more brought to the surface, that they expect that haptic. Like when we see the television adverts and it's the always the disclaimer, sequences may be shortened for the purpose of the advert, but it feels more conversational. Their feedback is that they're getting that expectation from it, and then how it helps fuel that continuous cycle of follow-up questions, its returns. So it's almost creating a new learned behavior, almost like how Google it kind of became that wider thing earlier on.
There are two things for me that kind of were a bit turned. I mean, were a bit put off for me for AI overviews. I haven't played yet with the AI mode. I'm in the UK, so I just put myself on a wait list using a VPN, so I didn't have the chance to work with it yet. But on AI overviews, the one thing was the fact that we all kind of saw Google kind of stay behind all the other AI competitors. For me, kind of tainted a little bit the capabilities of Google in terms of AI, and because we all expected Google to come on like leaps in front of all the others, and suddenly kind of I don't know if it was on. I want to believe that it's on purpose, because they had more to lose than everyone else in case they kind of failed at this in the sense of that some weird things would come out of their AI models. So they were probably a bit more cautious than everyone else. But the fact that they didn't seem to catch up significantly to models like the OpenAI, the ChatGPT, and even Sonnet that I use on a daily basis to help me with my scripts and stuff like that. For me, it took away a little bit of also the confidence that I have in these AI overviews, to the point that I became blind to them after a while. So some of them are, where I was like, in some cases where I would expect an instant answer, or where we would have these like prominent instant answers to come up, I would probably give a bit more attention to the AI overviews. But always with this grain of salt, like, is this like correct? Or is this like even like something that I can trust? And then for other things that for me it wouldn't make sense to have AI overviews, and they would just come anyway, I would just become blind to them. And so I think this move where Google, for me, it's a move where Google aims to make this AI overviews their own session. Its own dedicated tab, and you go there if you want to. Then it's more like, it's not so much them trying to force themselves into this AI race. So I mean, they want to be in it, obviously, like everyone seems to want. But I think they became aware that their role as a search engine has two aspects to this. Like, what you do in AI is not what you do in search, and vice versa. You search for things that you don't do. So, and this goes back to the topic that we were discussing earlier, like Google losing market share. I think it's, if you think, the early days, like, we did everything in Google, right? We did search, we used search for everything, even for social, to find blogs kind of to comment on. And when social media came, it just like took its share that was supposed to have anyway. And I think this is what is happening with search in Google, because we were using Google thinking of our assistant, so to speak, that gives us answers. but it would fail in these kinds of aspects where you have this very specific use case that you want an answer for, and it's a lot of things together that makes it very unique, and probably there was not a better way to find a search result that would answer your specific case. I know I had many, and I could solve them when AI came in. I couldn't before. So I think it just took its own space. It did that was supposed to have anyway. And so I think what Google is doing is like, okay, we are not gonna be able to kind of put this together in search as a unified experience. So we are gonna kind of separate and then let you decide when you want to be in AI mode and when you don't.
I think personally, users won't care, basically. We won't see the difference. It'll all be kind of one single thing. And, it's a bit like when you say to your mum, what did you click on, a paid advert or an organic advert? And they're like, what? I had so many rants of people where I'm like, why do you keep clicking on the paid adverts to go to the company? Why don't you just scroll down a bit? You've just cost them £2 to take them to their own. And nobody understands the SERP layout. Nobody understands. And that's a good thing. That's exactly what a good UX person should be working towards, where somebody kind of doesn't think it's all separate. And, you mentioned about local. I think, local is going to be so important in the AI world where, I'll be like, find me a quick pub around the corner that's not too busy, and it will just find something kind of there quickly. Google is terrible at bringing everybody and everything together. And what I mean by that is that, they are really good at kind of going, we've just done something brand new. And, they'll be like, we've replaced the old one with this new one, and it's really shiny, but it doesn't have half the features of the old one. And half those features are the ones that we really, really liked. A good example is, my phone just says, oh, we're going to replace Google Voice with, Gemini. It's going to be so much better. And I'd be like, brilliant. Spotify, play X, Y, Z. And it kind of goes, oh, I can't do that yet. Switch on the lights. Can't do that yet. Navigate to my partner's house. Oh, I can't do that yet. And it just doesn't do any of the things that it could do. And I think this is really, really, really frustrating that Google don't seem to kind of take into account some of the users that it kind of worked with. That said, what I did do recently was I got invited to a wedding, which is unusual because I don't usually get invited to weddings. Don't know why. And I took a photograph of the wedding card, and I said, find me a hotel, find me a cheap hotel, find me a taxi, put it in my calendar. And it managed to do a lot of things a lot more effectively than I expected it to be able to. I tried the same thing with ChatGPT, and it just failed miserably. It started getting the wrong dates and doing some other kind of crazy stuff. So yeah, Gemini has got some real strengths. And as long as Google don't kill the good parts because they almost forget about it and they don't connect all the dots and they don't see how the user base is kind of working, it's going to be really, really effective. And like I say, if I can use you kind of want it to work a bit like, I know that Carolyn, you're a Trekkie. I don't know about the rest of you, but you want it to kind of work like the ship's computer. Okay, computer, do X, Y, Z, and it will come back and do it, and you'll be able to chat with it. And everybody's selling AI as being this kind of future-proof solution, but it's got to just work. And I keep finding that it just doesn't just work.
That's a great point. I was just thinking about Apple Intelligence, and like that was the expectation there when it rolled out. Like they fumbled that back. I mean, they fumbled Siri back in the day, but they really fumbled Apple Intelligence because that's the expectation of like that, abstraction layer of AI being able to interact, and now we're hearing it more with these operators and, the context modal protocol on Claude and like this next level, the buzzword of agentic AI and the impact of that on search. But I think you're right, Jerry. Like I think inevitably at some point, consumer behavior will move from traditional search. Like I do disagree with Pedro. Like I think eventually it will move to like this conversational search where that will be our presence, where we're not limited, where it'll give us the appropriate type of answer in the appropriate medium connected to the appropriate data. It's always a data thing, a personalization thing, and we can ask very specific things. It's just that right now, we're seeing, to your point, they're struggling to integrate the market. When they first made the announcement back at I/O a couple of years ago, I thought they were going to roll out AI mode in search at the top of search. Like that's kind of the impression. Then they like spent a whole year with SGE with the follow-up questions and AI overviews of what it was. Then they removed the follow-up questions in the AI overview, but rolled it out. It's just like we always overestimate and underestimate Google at the same time. You always think there are like these really brilliant people working there, which there are, and they can do amazing things. And then you're like, but do you really understand the big picture in turn, or maybe we're all, the sheep and we're just missing the point. I can never decide if Google knows exactly what they're doing or they're not.
I think with how the layouts used to be, like to your point, it looked, I can remember that initial video they showed, and it was like looking for backpacks and snorkel stuff in, I think, Hawaii or something. It did feel like it was a top of SERP experience, but then part of me also thinks, are they, as a product, they've always been a search engine. They've always had a specific thing, and people have grown in expectation to go to them as a search function, whereas all the AI toolings and the LLMs that have appeared, they've always had that differentiation from the off. So I sometimes look at Google's janky-ish approach to fumbling AI onto the SERP in different ways as almost like the halfway house of the person who doesn't want specifically to have an AI because they don't fully trust AI. They won't go to ChatGPT. They won't go to Claude. They don't want to do that. But at the same point, they just want what they want. They understand the benefit. So it's kind of like, in my head, Google's kind of gone, I'm going to take that segment of the market that isn't going to be an early adopter or a tech enthusiast, and I'm just going to go for the late majority, part of the majority that doesn't really care or doesn't really bother. And quantifiably, yeah, there's going to be, I mean, Caroline, you said like the sliver of fingernail at the start, which will boost other engines and LLMs exponentially, and they'll have fantastic user bases, but Google will still retain a heavy core of a market, which you can ultimately serve ads to.
I sometimes wonder if the problem is that they've got such a broad diversity of user types now. They've got so many people they have to keep happy. And there has been so much time and effort spent in training some of the troglodytes that we're trying to drag along to use search. Now we've thinking in keywords, we've got them accustomed to it. This is what they do. They're used to it. They know how to use the Google. Now we're asking them to go back to things that they used to do, which were ask big, long, complicated questions. And they're like, I just got to the point where you taught me how to do this. Why are you asking me to change? Don't make me change. And then they'll freak out. The problem is they're a big section of the market. And maybe it's just a function of Google catches a lot of blowback when this big section of the market that is, probably over 60, still has an AOL email account, those kinds of people, they get confused and they don't want to mess them up to the point that they just leave because user base. So they're kind of baby stepping things to, they're losing some of us that are on the bleeding edge, but they're keeping happy this huge swathe of their user base that are really kind of set in their ways and not adaptable. So maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. I don't work there. Speculation.
Well, I mean, if the data's anything to go by, they're 373 times the size of ChatGPT still. So, yeah, that probably is the case. Before we close,
anecdotally, my mother, I do a lot of research with my mother. Mom doesn't use the ChatGPT. Just getting the hang of the Google, still doesn't trust it, but will not touch the AIs. Every time I bring it up, she's like, oh, those. And then we change the subject. So
I'm with you there. My father still sends me an SMS, despite the fact we have WhatsApp and other methods, to ask me, is a certain soccer match on Amazon Prime that evening? And I'm like, you can literally press one button on your remote and it will tell you, but you still go your way to text me. But anyway, before we wrap up, does anyone have any other views on Google AI at the moment, or are we all opinioned out? Great. Well, on that note, then, thank you very much, Garrett, Jerry, Pedro, and Carolyn, for joining me on this evening, morning, afternoon. I forget what time zone everyone's in. Thank you for taking time out your day. Let's go with that. Everyone's still on a day that ends in a Y. Thank you to Sophie, Alicia, and other people for watching live via YouTube. Until next time, thank you very much for watching.